The film you're about to see has no characters, it has no people. It is a film to describe to you and explain visually the effect of cymatic frequencies on texture, structure, water, oil. If you spare a little of your imagination as you watch this film as it runs, you will see many things that answer many questions. The Earth itself coming into existence, explosions, eruptions, atomic explosions, bombs. Everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound. Sound is the factor which holds it together. Sound is the basis of form and shape. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. We are told that this is how the worlds began and how creation took shape. If we put that into the modern idiom and say that into the great voids of space came a sound and matter took shape. Please watch carefully.
Hello? Hello? Is this thing on? It was October 23rd, and I'd had a long day after my analytic philosophy course. I sunk into my armchair and lit a cigarette. The sun shone through the slit between the curtains at just the right angle, imposing a wall of a warm yellow ray that perfectly illuminated the cigarette smoke that escaped my lips in an exhale as I whispered, "Wow." Like a film on a projector, I witnessed the light bringing my breath to life. Milky waves that rippled and flowed, the vibrations from my speakers pushing and pulling at these waves like an orchestra composer. In my keen awareness of the physical effects of my words that I saw manifested through the air particles, I reflected on the words of Susan Stebbing that I had just learned about in my earlier class. We cannot discuss what a word is without discussing how a speech sound or shape is used. I am trying to quit smoking, I promise. Yet, as once Archimedes had taken a bath, and as an apple had hit Newton on the head, so too did once Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi listen as a blacksmith hammer struck an anvil and reverberated, humming. As he tuned into this rhythm, he began to whirl like a planet in orbit. As I sat in my room in awe, watching the smoke dance for me, I too felt like I was having one of those moments. Sounds indeed have shapes, or we can call them sound shapes. And this shape is implicitly integral to understanding the full context of how a word is used. The meaning elicited by an utterance must to some degree be correlated to and entrenched by the sensory experience of the vibrations of that word, hitting the eardrum in a certain neurologically recognizable pattern. The aforementioned Maulana Rumi used to recite poetry as he spun in his spirals, trying to act as an amplifier of the frequency he was tapped into, and others often used to jot down his verses. I am water. I became wind. I have come to deliver the thirsty ones from this mirage. Speech is that wind which was formerly water. It becomes water when it casts off the veil. Poem 34 from the mystical poems of Rumi. To me, these lyrics represent the tradition in Islamic mysticism to interpret symbols dynamically with an almost quantum like flexibility, refusing to adhere to the classical rules of metaphysical rigidity. Imbued with this fluidity, this free form, the liquid motion like thinking is a marker of neuroplasticity. Imam Al-Ghazali, in his book Mishakat al-Anwar, The Niche of Lights, uses a similar analogous framework to decode light as a symbol of the universal intellect, making connections between photons and various entities carrying information. It is through such a lens of esoteric and mystical analysis that I wed with contemporary scholastic conventions with which I want to delve into sonic information transmission and the various communicative properties of sound. The questions on my mind at this point in our journey were: how do words, a collection of sounds or symbols, key into the mental concepts we want to communicate? Vice versa, what information do these sights and sound contain, and how do we interpret meaning, inherent or applied, from sound to utilize as words? Are these concepts, word and sound, separate or one? Susan Stebbing had a few interesting ideas in her 1939 essay, Language and Misleading Questions. Stebbing has a practical approach to language, contrasting it with the strict logical syntax frameworks of contemporaries, like the logical positivists or Wittgenstein. Stebbing argued that words are non static and derive their meaning from how they are employed in speech acts. She critiques Wittgenstein's distinction between signs, which he used to refer to the physical components of a word, and symbols, or the meaning. Stebbing replied to the standards of her time: "This does not seem to me to be sufficiently helpful. It leaves unexplained how sounds or shapes can so be used as to be symbols." Instead, Stebbing explores how the brain builds a context based repository that associates sound shape with meaning. Championing the interpretive nature of the mind, Stebbing challenges the rigid, context free definitions of logical positivism, emphasizing that understanding emerges through interaction with language. As she writes, "I gather that even though there is nothing to say, still much may be shown. This suggests that meaning is tied to function, sonic resonance, but also sensory experience. For example, the same word can take on entirely different meanings depending on its presentation." Critiquing Carnap's vision of a logically perfect language, Stebbing points out that human nature is inherently imperfect but relational. She asserts, language is not a one-to-one code. Efforts to remove ambiguity might strip language of its richness and communicative power. Language thrives on creative brain processes that generate patterns of association beyond binary computation, making it a uniquely human tool. It is this process that allows humans to take the seed of sound and blossom from it meaning, which is what I want to investigate. What does it mean to say sound has shape, and what information does the shape bring with it? What relationship does the human mind have to the sonic geometry, and what does it reveal about how the mind works? Stebbing did enormous work in conceptualizing communication as more than just a mechanical code, but perhaps she did not go far enough when she said sound is inherently meaningless. Let's think about consciousness coming to terms with sound and the evolution of our eardrums.
A fluid colored black is dripped into a transparent fluid.
Vibration now gives rise to curious eddy formations. It is always a pair of eddies that is created. One pair after another is generated so that we finish up with a whole series of such pairs of eddies in a symmetrical arrangement. The formation of these eddies by vibration is particularly significant because it is eddies of this kind which are specifically formed in the cochlea of our ears whenever we hear sounds. That is to say, they are not ordinary eddies as defined in rheology, but vibratory eddies, with the members of each pair turning in opposite directions.
Our relationship with sound has always been intimate, and vibrations have shaped us, just as we shaped them. So we can use the infrastructure we have developed to perceive and understand what is happening to us, to allow evolution to develop sensory organs. To reinforce the idea of sound as more than frequencies, but all matter that is affected to hum at that frequency, we can explore physical structure, buildings. Every interval of space has harmonics, like any musical instrument. Constructions are instruments of light and sound. Many places of worship or oration use these principles of acoustics in architecture. The way the room sounds affects the mood of how we perceive a place like a church. I have been to the Badshahi Mosque, built by the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, where a whisper in one corner of the room can be heard anywhere on the other side.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Ruth Harriet Millikan's Language, a Biological Model, presents a naturalistic perspective on language, emphasizing its biological underpinnings and evolutionary development. As a biological phenomenon with its structures and functions shaped by evolutionary processes, language has developed to serve specific communicative purposes within specific human communities. Central to Millikan's theory is the concept of proper functions, which are the functions that a trait or behavior has been naturally selected to perform. She posits that linguistic elements have proper functions that have been preserved through cultural and biological reproduction, much like physical traits are passed down through genetic inheritance. Millikan introduces the idea of natural conventions, which are shaped by patterns of behavior that emerge and stabilize over time due to their communicative efficacy. These conventions are not arbitrary, but are grounded in the biological and social contexts of human interactions. Thus, over time, as the vibrations and reverberations of sound intermingle with us and we use them to communicate, the capacity of language and interpreting sound is mapped into our DNA. Millikan writes, language conventions can be considered as lineages of precedent. A public language is a huge web of crisscrossing lineages of reproduced patterns consisting of tokens of linguistic forms and responses to them. People listen to one another, then repeat words and idioms they have heard, syntactic arguments they have heard, and tonal inflections they have heard, arranging these into new combinations. Genuine words cannot be accidentally formed by the wind. Further, any genuine linguistic token is automatically a token from one particular language or another. When discussing linguistic forms, reference to the form as being in L1 or in L2, etc., may help the hearer to identify the form intended. But whether identified or not, if the form is a genuine natural language form, it already is essentially in either L1 or L2 or some other language without that. This phenomena may explain why certain sounds have inherent associations, such as whoosh being calming, as we relate it to water, or boom, 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 as a type of a force that we may have heard with volcanoes or other eruptions. Chanting may help us tune into the ancestral memory that is encoded into our DNA from when our neurology was first shaped. When we speak, it is an exchange of energy.
The beginning was the word. Sound creates, shapes, transforms life. Mantras, they're not mere words, yet vibrational keys unlocking our cosmic doors. The primordial sound, universe's heartbeat, is your essence vocalized. And Sanskrit, a language of energy, each syllable a universe into itself. Chanting rewires neural pathways, alters consciousness, and elevates frequency. Kirkiki, Kirkuku, Karkaka, seed sounds, activating dormant DNA, evolutionary catalyst. And your voice is a tool of creation. Every word spoken is a spell cast.
Now that we are thinking of sound as an evolutionary catalyst for our language and being, so much so that syllables are mapped onto our DNA in some way, we can think about D. Payton's essay, Searching for Social Properties, whom I've had the privilege of meeting. In it, they discuss the relationship between the predicates and essence of a word. A predicate can be understood similarly to Wittgenstein's use of sign to demonstrate the actual structural marker of a word, and essence is what the marker is trying to mark. Although the essence of a word cannot change, the sign used to refer to it can be taken away, so we no longer have words to refer to that essence, or the word is replaced, showing our language shapes our reality through our ability to refer and interact with essences. Payton draws on Kit Fine's notion of essence, proposing that a social property's essence includes social factors, such as behaviors or language conventions. For instance, to be cool means being treated in certain ways by others, making social interaction part of its definition. This reminds me of Susan Stebbing's understanding of language as dynamic, where we can think of sound as forming the predicate and the interpretive process of the mind forming the essence. Just as cymatic patterns reveal the physical manifestation of sound, predicates embody meaning through human interaction. Both are ways to translate sound to meaning. In verse 31 of the second chapter of the Holy Quran, God states, He made man know the names of all things, name being emblematic of the essence of a property, something that previous creations were not capable of. To know something's true name is to know its essence, through experiencing it. The social malleability that allows the predicates to refer to some other essence, mentioned by Stebbing and Payton, is mentioned in a later part of the same chapter, where God refers to how man exchanged the true name of things for their own benefit, so they can manipulate control over how we refer to these things and know them. At this point, sound can be understood as a natural data pattern utilized as a medium of information. This is because sound is dynamic, and so it lends itself well to the dynamic interpretation of the mind as it makes the rules of language. This process of turning information to language isn't exclusive to sound, but it is fundamental about how we interact with data of all sorts. In chapter 1 of The Life of the Quran by Muhammad Jebara, there is a short history of the evolution from pictography like hieroglyphics to letters. This echoes a parallel between the evolution of a collection of onomatopoeia, exasperated grunts and oofs, passionate coos and moans, to becoming formal language of spoken word. Jebara describes how the first pre Semitic language, from which most spoken language today was born, relied upon certain icons that were universal in the world around them, like the skull of an ox, a house, or the flowing of a river. Letters are physical symbols that make up the shape of a word in the visual realm. In our mind, we make a map linking sounds and symbols, demonstrating the dynamic nature of neuroplasticity. The American linguistic psychologist Michael Tomasello wrote, "Human communication starts with joint attention and shared intentionality." If we think of a non-verbal language like ASL, we can see a multitude of rich examples of what we have described of translating motion to information packets. Look at, for example, the sign for day and how it resembles the motion of the sun. Other signs rely upon similar universal principles. Visual vernacular, an ASL storytelling technique that is a culmination of elements including strong body language, facial expressions, and mime, demonstrates communication through many physiological means, demonstrating this idea even more explicitly. The German non narrative film movement of the 1920s, known as absolute film, attempted to visually abstract a cinematic analog to music. This was an attempt to create an absolute language of form, a desire common to early abstract art. As emerging technologies such as virtual reality or augmented reality develop, we find new ways of communicating, as we can think of these technologies as advanced sense organs and enabling advanced communication, although there are many other technologies that are yet to be invented. There are many creative ways we can think of the notation of sound. Classically, we have used musical notes of categories like treble or bass to write an orchestra, such as Mozart or Beethoven would have. But some musicians have imagined other, newer ways of representing this sonic information. First, let's take a look at new digital instruments, and then some innovative notations. Expanding our connection of sound will help us to decode it, but our abstractions cannot be absent of a grounded connection to the physical input source, or they will be based in conjecture and be non unified. What is the inherent information that sound carries? We can conceive of this through Lissajous curves and other types of mathematical modeling or quantitative substantiation.
They're called Lissajous curves, and they were discovered by French physicist Jules-Antoine Lissajous using his famous tuning fork experiment. Let me show you how it works. The experiment involves two tuning forks with two small mirrors glued to their tines. A laser is bounced off each mirror and onto a screen, so that the vibration of one tuning fork makes the laser point move up and down, and the other makes it move left to right. But when Lissajous struck both tuning forks at the same time, he found that the point traced out a circle. And when he swapped out one of the tuning forks for one that vibrated at twice the frequency, the laser traced out a figure 8. Lissajous experimented with pairing different tuning forks that vibrated at different frequencies and found that the shape created was dependent only on the musical interval between the two tuning forks. For example, this particular pairing of musical notes is called a major third, and when these tuning forks are used in the experiment, they create this shape. With this experiment, Lissajous discovered a unique shape corresponding to every musical interval. What I find fascinating about this chart is that some element of the character of each interval seems to come through in these visualizations. Nicer sounding intervals produce simpler shapes, and more dissonant intervals produce squigglier shapes.
In terms of thinking of the application of this theory, we can think of how, by mapping our understanding of language and the ways in which we represent it to the inherent qualia of sound, such as frequency, tempo, or volume, we will be able to use advances in artificial intelligence like large language models to reverse engineer similarities to animal communication and their behavior. Creative ways of thinking of sound and shapes and how sound is a shape will open new doors to understanding as we learn to grasp our relationship to sensory information.
We are closer than ever to having two-way communication with animals. The Earth Species Project has built AI systems that are learning to decode animal communications and eventually speak back. Birds organize their songs using patterns similar to human sentences, helping scientists understand how other species communicate. Humans and birds share a similar brain architecture. Both species have similar neural circuits that control vocal organs. Like humans, birds have critical developmental periods when they best learn vocalizations. These similarities make birds valuable models for studying vocal communication, despite being evolutionarily distant from humans. Using their findings on birdsong, researchers are now studying marine mammals, who also use similar sound patterns to communicate. This technology could transform how we protect wildlife. For instance, imagine being able to reroute shipping lanes because we understand what whales are telling us.
In conclusion, I want to discuss how by understanding the content of this essay, we can open our minds to enriching our personal relationship with sound. By recognizing the meaning of the world of sound and the mechanics of how it elicits feelings within us, we can imagine our use of music, spoken word, and meditation in new ways. Just as they say, you are what you eat, so too, the song of your existence, your resonant frequency, who you are, is defined by what you hear. When thinking of the creation of our universe, we often conceptualize analogies of God as a painter or a sculptor. I want to leave you with a thought. What if we thought of God as a DJ?
And what he discovered was, when you speak to the water and you say certain things like, I love you, or, you're my friend.
Or beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful, yeah. Angel. It could be simple, just like angel, happiness, peace. When you say these positive words to the water and then you freeze it, it makes beautiful shapes.
Most of the time they're symmetrical. They look like
you Google images. They have photos of this.
They look like snowflakes, like beautiful symmetrical snowflakes.
Now, when you say mean, nasty words to the water and then they freeze the water, it would make ugly
Asymmetrical
shapes.
Asymmetrical.
Yeah, like cracks and looks like damage.
Bubbles.
And you basically prove that like your consciousness and your will combined with the intention behind your words affects reality. It's like the concept that like your words are magic, so much so that you change physical reality.
Yeah, it is quite literally proof that the things that come out of your mouth
change reality,
affect your physical surroundings.
Something that Marconi once said was that when sound is generated, it never actually dies away completely. I just think such an evocative notion that, you know, all sound is still there, resonating around the universe, however faintly.
إن